going to take a few minutes to take a look really at JavaScript object notation, give you enough background you can work with it a little bit. From a data management perspective, you ought to recognize it when you see it. It's just a text file carrying data, but there's a certain format and scheme, if you will, to being valid JSON. And then there are schemas, that meaning it obeys some particular ideas we want, if we want to apply them and work with it a little bit. We're not going as deep with JSON, JavaScript object notation in this course as we did XML, and we didn't go very deep with that. There are schemas and style sheets. It's kind of a developing, even as we speak, notion. So they aren't quite refined, a little hard to work with, and a little too much in the weeds. That's the second comment here. I'm just looking at the assignment. We don't need to go there. Yay. We're going to work on JSON kind of by hand. I'm giving you a pretty good starting point. There are tools that can convert XML to JSON and back and forth, many of these, and you'd have to try them, and they usually have something that doesn't quite work, and you have to do a lot of data wrangling. That is just a matter of the discipline. So if you basically you're going to create a JSON version of your CD library XML from a previous assignment. I think it's easiest just to do it by hand like I did, and I'll show you how to get started. But if you say, gosh, I convert XML to JSON 15 times a day and I can apply a tool, then go ahead and apply a tool. All right, and it's about as easy to kind of walk through getting started on the assignment than sitting on the edge of the pool and talking about how good it is. Oh, by the way, we're going to have some comma separated value discussion in here. So first, I'm going to just take the link to this file. It's a text file I just put out there on my website. And what it does is have a JSON version of the author's starting point CD library. Remember, the author had an XML chapter, and we talked about the CD library. And rather than talk through all these braces and brackets and commas and quotes, I'd like to go ahead and bring it into Visual Studio and add it to the project we have started, just because Visual Studio will make it easier, because it understands JSON, to kind of talk about its structure and a little bit about what's going on. So the way I recommend installing this is I'm up on in the VM. Open up a browser. I'm in Edge. When I got this by left clicking on this, but if I right click, at least in Edge, and I think in Chrome and Firefox, if that's what you use, it will have a save link as opportunity. And what I'd recommend you do is go into Documents. You should have this CD library project. If I change it to all files, you'll see I was trying to show, let me do this again and then try to see the other step. You could see the other step. So save link as, make sure you get into your, and I'm going to get rid of that. I didn't want to. It saved that text file. What I wanted to do was change this name, because we're calling everything else cdlib. So I'm going to call it cdlib.json and get rid of the text. I was going to try to show you there's some other things in that library. We'll look at it in a little bit, but just kind of save it, change the name, make sure you're in your CD library and Documents, and save it. If I look in Documents now and go into CD library, I see my assets from before, the XML and the style sheet and the schema. I see this thing that I just did save, and there's this SLN file. That's sort of a manifest, something Visual Studio it calls a solution, where it remembers everything that's in that particular solution collection of projects, but we really just have some files we've added. So after I save that there, I would crank up Visual Studio and open up the CD library solution. It probably is going to be hanging there if you worked on it recently. If not, you can kind of search for it and look for the SLN file that's in there, but here it was convenient to open this up. And up it comes, and quit spinning. And it might open up like this with some XML open, or depending on where you left it. It has yeah, it will have some assets in there. But notice that even though cdlib.json is in this folder, it's not part of the project. What we have to do is add it. If I had some old XML things, I would just close them, more for kind of clearing the clutter than anything else. But to get that JSON as a member of the project, we'll right click and we'll add, but this time we'll do add existing item. The thing is already there, we just want it to be included in the project. So existing item, and then go down and say we want the CD JSON and add. And notice it just made it okay. I understand now this is, not just some file out there, it's part of the project. And it also opened it then in the editor, and since it's JSON and Visual Studio understands JSON, it works from there. Notice you could apply a schema. Like I said, I found that getting a little too tenuous really for our purposes on how a JSON schema works. So like XML, there's the notion of a well-formed JSON. It obeys the rules to be JavaScript object notation, which this does, and yours will need to. But like XML, there's well-formed XML, but then sometimes a schema imposes more rules on it. What are the column names? What are the column types? Or element names and element types? And so you could apply a schema or not. Similarly, for styling, JavaScript, usually use JavaScript itself to style JavaScript. It's part of a web page, and you maybe, or if you were showing the CDs, you have a list element and you put in list items, and it's all good stuff. And if we're doing kind of web development things, we dive into it, and it's very handy and powerful. But it's not sort of the data management. The data management is I can manage and work with JSON. So how does JSON end up working? Well, it starts with a brace, and a brace in JSON says, the opening, and it's a squiggly brace. I'm defining an object, and when I'm defining an object, I need to give you the name of that object, and that's in double quotes. We can get to the question, well, what if I wanted double quotes as part of the element or something? We can do that. We're not worried about how to do it. There's escaping in that. So basically, this is saying my JavaScript object, main object is I have an object that's called CD library. Colon then just says, I'm done with the name, and what comes after is the value of that object. Well, the value of an object can be itself another object, and that's what this is saying. So CD library is an object. Its content is another object called CDs. Quote. Now, square brace says I'm beginning an array. Okay, an array is kind of a sequence of, typically we'd want them to be the same kinds of items. There's nothing, you can make a schema enforce that. There's nothing that would force us to make sure that all the elements in an array are separate items. But, so that's what this saying is, CDs. Oh, it's an array. And what's an array? Array has elements. Well, there's an object that's in this CDs array. We're finally down to some atomic values, and the first object in this array called CDs is called CDID, colon, and then its value. And so the values go into quotes too. Notice that Visual Studio is coloring them. It helps us to kind of, keep straight, that's data, this is kind of the name. And then there's a CD label, element, if you will, property to the object is the way you'd put it in. That is Atlantic for this. The title is pyramid. This is just the data that the author had. I put in the genres. Okay, you might, I put in the genres for you. Golly, well, I will leave it that way. You've got to put in a CD comment and add one. All right. So I put in these genres. Notice if the element is a excuse me a sec, is a numeric value, it doesn't need a quotes around. It understands that it's numeric, right? So this object has some values, and then it's got this element or this property called tracks. Oh, but tracks is an array too. And tracks array has, this first track. Notice, Visual Studio makes it easy. If I highlight this brace, it shows me the matching brace, and the indentation helps. So that particular track has, track number 1, the title, the length. Notice at the end of this object, then there's a comma. If you're making an array, you separate the different elements of an array with a comma, and then this is element 2. It didn't need to be track number 2 to be element, but it's the second element we do, and that begins here and ends there. We don't have a comma over the last one. This brace here says, I am done. You can see how it's kind of grayed that one out. I am now done telling you about the tracks element on this CD. This brace here says, I am done telling you about this CD. This comma says, oh, I'm going to tell you another CD in this particular array of CDs, and so we have it, and that a CD is an object. We got these items. We have the tracks for that CD, ending that the tracks array, ending that second CD object, ending the array of CDs, and finally ending the object that's called CDs. Matches here. Sorry, I just got allergies working. And I'll try to get through it and not cough into the microphone. And then this ends the object itself. And you can kind of see some of the structure here. If I collapse this, it collapses that first CD. If I collapse this, it collapses that second CD. So you can see better, okay, CDs is an array, and it has this thing in it, which maybe I can't quite see it, but sort of black box. So it's a thing, comma, a thing, and then the closing brace. Then I'm finished telling you about the object called CDs, and I'm finished overall. And so sometimes if you get a little bit in the weeds, it helps to use. I opened up that first, but what I did was close off this tracks element. And or you can each individual track, and you can kind of say, okay, tracks is this thing, then the other thing. And so that's JavaScript object notation. It's kind of a little bit like XML, a little bit wordy. You keep kind of repeating in XML element names, and in JavaScript, same thing, right? If we had 1,000 CDs, we would have 1,000 times in the text file where we had quote CD ID quote colon. Okay, and each character takes up a byte, so it can sometimes be take up more space, but usually we use it for data transfer, and then for efficiency it might get put into a database. You have the task in the assignment of adding a CD comment to every and I'm not going to check, but just so you get to work with the format. So, again, the column name or the element name gets in quotes, then a colon. I don't know if you have to skip a space, but I do. And then if it's a string, then in quotes, the comment. And then you get to add one more CD. So it's really not too much, and then just save it, but it lets you have some experience working with JavaScript object notation. All right. In this exercise, I also have you, and we'll just look at the exercise. You're going to create this CSV file. We're going to leave it in this CD library folder in the document. Put it in the same place. I don't think there's a way to add. We can try it. Add it to the project. I didn't think about that. Just a short hint. What we'd like is then a this comma separated values. It turns out an easy way for us, and let's take the easy way and then see about it, is to open the an XML file in Excel, and let me browse, and it's in CD library, and okay, that's the only one, I guess that it sees out there. So it understands XML. So if it didn't do that, we could do this. There are other files there, but that's the one that has the library that you completed earlier for the earlier assignment. I'm just going to open that, and what we want to do is open it as an XML table. Now this one, in my case, was not the completed one. It was the author's starting point, right? So I have CD genre, but I don't have comment, and I've only got the 2. But notice what it did. It flattened out that hierarchical structure. Remember we had CD and element, and put it in a relation. What maybe would be a first normal form almost view if we had a record ID or something out here to distinguish these different lines. An identifier would be cooking, but it made it into an Excel table. And this, I understand this. You might say to yourself, I didn't. We'll just take a look at, okay, that was, okay, I can recognize that it's XML, but you got these tags that just get in, really, looking at XML isn't a good thing. Oh, by the way, don't forget to save your JSON when you're done with it. But what you can do now that you have it in Excel, you could save it as an XLS. Okay, there's no way to from this particular Excel view, say, add something in here and have it saved back as XML. There are ways to make that happen if you want to edit your XML using Excel. We're not getting to that, but nice handy thing about XML, since it is almost they're tables here, and this is a table in XML. We could name the table something else, are this comma separated value format. The idea of comma separated values is you have a row, it'll be a text file of column names, and then you have rows of data, and each element is separated by commas. Easier to create one and talk about it. So I'm going to do File and Save As, and we'll browse, and we want to put this in CD Library. We want to call it cdlib.csv. Again, that's short for comma separated values. All right, and notice it. I did that wrong. Okay, File, Save As. Now in CD Library, it's good to name it CSV. Make sure that you choose a CSV type for it. Okay, what that did was just change the name and put XLSX on the end. So make sure you have a CSV type. Now you're going to get to some features might be lost, okay? Because CSV, if you have formulas, you formatting, all that is going to get lost. It looks okay now, but you're going to want to say yes, and that changed it as a comma separated value. It still kind of looks the same here. If we get out of Excel now, and when you're working with CSV, even if you just saved it, it's going to ask, do you want to change your, save your changes? You could probably say don't save and be, but I always say save again. It'll remind you that you have some features, and I do this. It's a comfort to me that it's I know it's going down as a CSV file, but it got in there. This was that mistake that I wanted to get rid of. But there is cdlib CSV. Notice that it will open just probably as a default with Excel, but I want to open with Notepad instead. And that's what a CSV file looks like, right? It's got, the first line typically doesn't have to be, are the names for columns. And sometimes when you're importing a CSV, you say, does my first line have headers or not? And then there's the CDID, a comma, the title, blah, blah, blah. And that's comma separated value notation. One thing I don't know that you can do, but I'm just going to try it. I didn't ask you to do this. Yeah, okay, so you can add it to the thing. It doesn't have any, I think this just understands it's a text file. I could just do, it's not doing anything like in JSON that or XML where it's sort of warning, well, that's not even well-formed CSV. It's just letting you type what you want. All right, so a little bit about JSON, a little bit about CSV. Takeaways are their formats for transferring data. Oh, one thing about the CSV, notice some of these, the Tisket Tasket, wonder why that got, of all of them, got quotes around it. And not some of the others. Interesting. And when you're getting out of Visual Studio, it said, oh, do you want to change the solution? Always kind of, unless you really are sure you don't, say yes. What that does is remember what's the manifest and what's in the project and things like that. All right. And, in real life, if we wanted to work with this CV, okay, now going to ask us, and we can open it back up in Excel and see it. What I can't explain is why a tisket, a tasket, but none of these others, I know why it had quotes around it, because let me do one more thing while I'm here. It's just this kind of thing. Well, what if, in general, one of the elements in JSON, in CSV, in XML includes a character that means something, like a comma is a separator for columns in CSV. Well, a tisket, a tasket had a comma in it. So if we didn't put a tisket, comma, a tasket in quotes, then it would have taken a tisket as this and a tasket as that, and then it would have had this other column that it didn't know what to do with. So that's why that got quotes. And so there's always ways, what if I wanted to have an open and close brace or bracket in JSON or even in XML, there are ways to escape and get it in there. And when you run into it, you can do a web search and figure out, how do I get a double quotes? How do I get a double quotes as part of an element in any of these where the double quotes mean something, and there are ways that you can escape and do it. Usually our work with data management is preparing for our folks. I guess one more thing that I might want to demonstrate that there is for JSON, just while I'm kind of going, you can do a select for JSON. I should have probably practiced this, but let's see. How about I use my Northwind database? So if you needed to prepare, I really want to use Northwind maybe. And I don't know if I'll get the syntax exactly right, but I think is one way to do it. All right. It wasn't able to show it. I just tried copying and pasting. It said XML, but what it did make a JSON. It's saying, oh, it decided it's an array. The array has here's the first object, which is all these columns, comma, here's the second object. So I was kind of making the point that a lot of times you don't work with JSON by hand. You kind of get it created as a tool. If you were desperate and you needed a CSV file, if I click here, it highlights everything, and you can say save results as, and it will save it as a CSV file. And we can also do file, I think, do it up here, save results as, and do a CSV if we wanted a comma delimited. Somebody said, oh, I need a comma delimited version of the customers. All right, and just to prove nothing up my sleeve, I just save that in documents, kind of natively, and whoop, there it is, right? So, but really the format, though, it's not an Excel file. We can open in a Notepad, or I should probably use Notepad Plus more, and there it is. It's kind of wrapping because it's so long, but so CSV, whole point of that exercise was usually you tool these things, right? You use some tool to create the CSV or JSON, or for that matter, XML. Use some tool to interpret it or present it or do that. Use some tool to present it, change it, send it. It's only a meanie like me that makes you get down in the weeds and work with it by hand, but just for a little. All right, enough said. See you next time. Bye-bye.